This week's movie is Irreversible, being a 2002 French psychological thriller written and directed by Gaspar Noe. Let's not beat around the bush here. Reactions to this movie are almost certainly going to fall into two distinct categories. Firstly, this is a piece of directorial and filmic genius, or this is unwatchable shite. The craziest thing, this is almost certainly by design. The narrative structure, the narrative, cinematography and soundtrack are all designed to make viewing this film as uncomfortable as possible for the audience. Let's tackle each one of these elements in turn and see exactly why this is either a work of genius or, as Roger Ebert once said, a movie so violent and cruel that most people will find it unwatchable. This film contains extreme sexual violence. If that is something liable to upset you in any way, do not watch this film. Under any circumstances, just take my word for it, you are definitely gonna fall into the unwatchable shite camp. The first element of Irreversible that is either genius or makes this unwatchable depending on your point of view is the film's narrative structure. It is told in reverse, consisting of 14 scenes with each one taking place chronologically before the one that precedes it. So we open with the aftermath of the climactic scene before transitioning to what would be a traditional film's climactic scene. Don't get to the film's inciting incident until around an hour in, and end with one of our main characters just sitting on a sofa. It's incredibly jarring and off-putting as a viewer. I can't lie that had someone not requested I watch this, I'd have turned it off after about 8 minutes, entirely confused and bewildered by what was going on. Those first 8 to 10 minutes are almost unwatchable as a viewer, but at the same time, it is an act of genius, dragging you into and immersing you into the world and psychology of the protagonist, who is, at that very moment, just like you, entirely bemused, bewildered and lost as to what the hell is going on in his life. He doesn't seem to fully understand how he got to this point. As the narrative unfolds in reverse, we as the audience become more and more comfortable with the narrative structure, just as Vincent Cassel's character Marcus regresses to being within his own comfort zone. The audience's and protagonist's journeys mirror each other, in other words. Gaspar Noe has however said that the only reason the story unfolds in reverse is that Christopher Nolan's Memento had just come out, being a huge hit, and it was the only way he could find financing for Irreversible by pitching it as a film whose narrative structure was backward. So maybe this element was entirely a happy accident. Moving on to the narrative itself, this is the area of the film that I would suggest most people are going to have the biggest problem with, and is the element of the film that received the most vitriolic critical reception. Straight off the bat, the first scene is the main character from Noe's prior film The Butcher discussing why he went to prison with another unnamed individual, that being he had sex with his daughter. So we start this off with the discussion of incest, and believe me when I say it's all downhill from here. Quickly move on to some serious homophobic language, which is later made even worse by the fact the rapist Latenia is a gay man, making the rape he commits even more inexplicable. I don't know if Noe is homophobic or he just did this to again further increase the level of discomfort for the audience. But either way, I can see why someone would think this film is hideously homophobic. That scene is followed by seeing an entirely innocent man get his face bashed in by a fire extinguisher and beaten to a bloody pulp. We aren't even more than 10 minutes in at this point, and as I said before, I would have turned this off had I not been watching for this video. But yet again, all these narrative elements are designed to invoke feelings of disgust, revulsion, confusion and bewilderment in the audience. The same emotions that Marcus is himself experiencing at that moment in time. We haven't even gotten to the rape scene yet, which is a gruesome and grueling 9 minutes long torturous experience, being, I hazard to say, the most realistic depiction of rape ever committed to celluloid. I've said in the past I'm not against rape being a narrative plot device, or rape revenge movies per se. I'm against them being so graphic that they almost become pornographic in scope. In this film's case, the fact this rape is so brutal, so graphic and realistic, I can see why someone would just turn it off at this point, just saying enough is enough. That being said, it is entirely in keeping with Noe's directorial narrative and cinematographic vision for the film, that being to shock, appall and invoke a reaction of utter discomfort from the viewer. Would a shorter, less graphic scene have had the same emotional and physical resonance? Well, that's a difficult question to answer, but I kinda suspect not. Especially when combined with the third element of this film, that is purely designed to invoke a sense of unease and disorientation within the audience, that of the cinematography. The opening few scenes of the film are shot in such a disorienting way that it is often impossible to focus on any one visual for more than a few seconds, before it is spun out of your eyesight and replaced by something else, or just spins around the screen wildly, all lit in stark dark shadows and red strobe lighting. It's utterly disorientating, and again, almost unwatchable, but does wonderfully recreate the very feelings that Marcus is himself feeling, ones of total and utter disorientation. This style of capturing and framing a scene continues gradually working its way to a more traditional style of framing until the rape scene, when the camera for the first time in the film stops dead and just holds on the rape centered in the frame, not moving for the whole ordeal, forcing you for the first time to really focus on something as the audience, forcing you to focus on what has caused the madness you've just seen unfold previously. After this scene, the framing and cinematography return to a far more conventional handheld style, mirroring the normalcy that Marcus and Monica Bellucci's character Alex has come from. It's a really powerful use of framing and cinematography. It's masterful filmmaking, but at the very same time is so uncomfortable to watch that I suspect the vast majority of people wouldn't make it through that first hour. I felt dizzy and almost nauseous watching this. It's that much of an assault on your senses, particularly when you add the final element to this directorial assault by Noe, the soundtrack, which at the beginning has a definite white noise hiss wound into it, one that you can't quite put your finger on, but recognise as the same hissing in your ears you get when you have a fight or flight response. It's unnerving, especially with everything else that is assaulting you visually at the same time. Of course, this dissipates and disappears as the film wears on, and as Marcus and Alex's life returns to normal, with the film closing with classical music as Alex sits looking happy, content and safe on a sofa at home. Irreversible is probably one of the most interesting movies I've seen in a long time, a tour de force of direction by Noe, using every trick in the filmmaker's toolbag to invoke a response from the audience, whilst at the same time that response is often one of utter confusion, disorientation, and ultimately revulsion at what is unfolding before your eyes, a work of genuine filmmaking genius, but ultimately one that I probably won't ever watch again, and honestly would only ever recommend to a very small group of people. Something a little bit different today. I often watch or someone requests a movie and I have something to say about it, but it doesn't particularly fit into my usual niche, so I thought I'd cover these movies from time to time for something a little bit different. So like, comment and subscribe if you want to see what comes next.